Hi there, and welcome to another BigLipz Podcast. This is now episode 23 we're on, and if this is the first time you're joining us, just to give you a rundown how things work. Basically, Catherine and I take turns hosting. My name is Sam Macaulay Blair. Hers is obviously Catherine Maurice. And each week we pick a different subject and then discuss a sort of range of films within. The two of us are sort of former and current film students, so we like to think we know a fair bit of movies, but then so does everyone. This week, the name of the podcast is going to be Cylinders, and the reason that I've picked that is because people like to talk about when referencing movies that are all encompassing and movies that work really well. They like to say that things are firing on all cylinders. So I thought it'd be interesting we kind of break down the core components of movie making and discuss some examples of films that maybe do one thing really well, but others terribly, or maybe the opposite, or maybe just examples that we have of films where like one specific aspect of it shines and we feel it needs to be discussed. So without further ado, the first aspect of filmmaking that we're going to look at is the script, the sort of body of text that obviously the movie is made from. So Catherine, I'm very interested to hear what examples you have of movies where you'd like to discuss the script.
Yeah, perfect. So the first one is a movie that we've mentioned before, that I've certainly mentioned before. I can't remember, but I don't think you've seen it. But that's the movie Jennifer's Body.
Oh, fantastic. I have not seen it.
No,
but I very much appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, it's such a good movie, and I feel like this is going to be such a weird point, but minus the whole kind of like demonic possession side of the story, it feels very like, it feels more like a teen movie than teen movies do. It just like the dialogue, especially, I feel the way that they have different kind of weird bits of slang and like colloquialisms. Trying to say that fast. It just feels very reminiscent of when you're at school, the way that you talk, because I feel like every school's probably got things like they said specific things, or even like location wise. So people in Scotland would say, "Oh, I've got an empty," for example, and that's like
fantastic example.
Yeah, I feel like adults and middle-aged people would never be like, "Oh, by the way, Sam, I've got an empty this weekend. If you want to come round, we'll have drinks and whatnot." It's very much like a kind of, well, maybe they do, I don't know, but it feels very much like a kind of like teen thing, obviously. And Jennifer's Body's kind of full of it, and it just makes it very much, it feels like it's not, it definitely gives off this vibe that it's not the kind of very clean, everyone's attractive, everyone's a 30-year-old trying to pretend to be a teenager. It doesn't give off that vibe. And yeah, as I say, I just think it's very reminiscent of school. And another good thing I think they did was that there's like obvious cliques, but they're not in the way that most like teen dramas do it, where it's like these people only talk to these people and they're like the furthest stereotype of whatever group it is. Whereas this movie has their little like kind of friendship groups, and you can tell, oh, that person belongs to the goths, and this and like Jennifer's popular kind of thing. But it's not. Yeah. It feels real. It doesn't feel like. Obviously, the particular scene I'm thinking about is the bit in Mean Girls when she goes around all the tables. That's obviously exaggerated, but I feel like other teen movies saw that and were like, "Oh my god, you know what? That's exactly what high school's like." When really it's not.
Good point, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think as well, it feels like the concerns that Needy has are very valid, where she's like, in the beginning of the movie, she's like, "Jennifer, don't go near those boys, they're disgusting and they're really creepy," and then it kind of carries on, and she acts like the way that I feel like you would act in that situation, where she's freaking out and everyone knows she's freaking out and she's just having her little meltdown over to the side. I think as well, another thing worth mentioning about it is that it's very funny. Again, that could be because of the little, like, there's one particular bit when one of the characters says, talking about another character, "Oh, I thought he only hung out with the dead girls," meaning like the gothy people and stuff like that. Yeah. So even just different things like that I think are really funny. Yeah, I think people give it a lot of slack, but it's kind of a like cult movie now, isn't it? Where
Yeah, I think it's definitely like it's definitely been getting a lot of praise. I think in the last few years, that wasn't there before. Like I remember, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it was panned or just ignored when it first came out.
yeah,
I remember being aware of it, but I don't think I heard anything like particularly positive. But yeah, I've definitely like seen like a reevaluation of it over the last few years, and it's nice to see. It's nice when like these movies are kind of like rediscovered, and it's a shame obviously that it wasn't received like that at the time, especially because like it had Megan Fox in it when she was pretty big,
yeah,
because I had Amanda Seyfried in it before she was bigger,
yeah.
but
Funnily enough,
you
she was also in Mean Girls. How weird.
was she?
Yeah, she was Karen, the dumb girl.
Wow. And there's the link.
Yep.
But yeah, no, excellent pick. I think not one. I mean, obviously I've not seen it, but not one I'd ever thought of. But
No.
I can absolutely appreciate that. Like,
It's definitely one I feel like I'm always trying, not to defend it, but to like justify why it's so good. Because I feel like maybe if you've just seen the cover of the DVD cover or the movie poster or whatever, you'd be like, God, that looks like trash.
Well, before like the reevaluation of it, like if you'd mentioned this like a few years ago when it was all I'd heard was like all I knew about it was like the initial sort of release, I'd have probably had a very different reaction because I hadn't heard like anything positive about it. Whereas now, because I've heard other positive things, I'm a lot more like forgiving towards it. I mean, I want to see it, to be honest. I want to check it out myself and sort of form my own thoughts. And again, that's not something that I ever thought I'd be saying. So.
Yeah. No, it's definitely such a good watch. Another one I wanted to mention just quickly was, again, another movie we've spoken about, and that's the movie Spy, because I feel like it's so funny. Like, I feel like it just doesn't get enough praise for how funny it is, and it's not just like physical comedy. It's very much like the things that they are saying are hilarious. Obviously, there's a lot of it's in like the delivery and the performance. But there's one bit, I feel like it's a bit more clever than maybe some comedies, where there's bits. One particular favourite bit of mine is when Jason Statham's character, and he's talking about all these really dangerous things that he's done and things that are really difficult to do. And one of his examples is taking up piano at a late age. And I always think that's just hilarious because it is notoriously difficult to take up piano at a late age. But why did he include that with things like driving in a flaming car and sewing his right arm back on? It's just
that's fantastic.
It's just amazing, and the whole movie's full of different bits like that, and it's just so funny. I feel like it definitely like it just elevates it above other kind of comedies, even like comedy. I'm not massive on The Hangover, so I'm gonna slag it off. But I feel like Spy just is so much more elevated than The Hangover because of those little moments where The Hangover is very much like, haha, there's a tiger, and The Hangover is funny, but it's just not. It's just
I was gonna say I actually would probably rate The Hangover not necessarily like as a movie, but like in terms of like if we're looking at just script, I would probably actually say give The Hangover quite a lot of credit, because I think the one thing that it does do well is it actually builds like quite a satisfying like narrative, like the actual like construction, never mind like the humor, but obviously like there is a plot. It does do a good job of like keeping you intrigued, that there's always like motivation behind what all the characters are doing. I think there's like, you know, the payoff is like sort of surprising and it is sort of well set up, and then by the end as well you do get like there is an arc for like each character, so it does feel like well sort of thought out on like just a textual level, that maybe again then it comes down to like the individual performers and their sort of like sense of humor, so that maybe is where like it could be seen as like a bit weaker, but I think the actual writing of it is probably pretty strong.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think as well that's similar to Spy in that I feel like if you took the kind of comedy elements out of Spy, there's still like a good kind of spy story there.
Yeah.
So I think it's like a really clever like a mishmash of the two kind of genres as well, which is good. Quite difficult to do, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's obviously it's what the movie aims for. That's the thing. That's the thing that like can be easy to forget, is like not every movie is trying to be Citizen Kane. You know, it's not like it's not everything wants to aim for like the sort of stars and like all this gravitas, and the movie is just trying to be like a sort of fun action comedy. And it does deliver on that. You know, it does a really good job. And as you say, like there's some really like witty writing that carries it a really, really long way. And that's what you need. Like I think that's the thing that like a lot of, especially like contemporary comedies, don't really do, is like there's not like tons of witty writing. I mean, maybe there is sometimes, but I think there's like a sort of devolution into just ad-libbing or just sort of really, really like basic just humour that you kind of see like in every comedy. It just feels like you're watching the same comedy, which probably doesn't help the fact that like it's probably not helped by the fact that like a lot of comedic actors obviously like translate across these films, so it's just very easy to like forget which of them you've seen and which of them you haven't, because they all feel like the same film at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like as well, even like Melissa McCarthy can be quite bad for that, because she's done a few movies that are very kind of generic and they're almost similar plot, or they feel like they're a similar plot. But I feel like Spy kind of stands out from that. She's the same
role in them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. So yeah, no, fair. I like your picks.
Thank you.
Very different and very good. Like yeah. My picks are also very different from yours. So the first one I wanted to talk about was not one that ever would have occurred to me, but I was doing research for this, just out of curiosity. Just I always like having a look and seeing like what the internet kind of like provides, because as well, like I think we've talked about this before, you always just forget like that you've seen so many movies. It's really hard to kind of like conjure up on demand like a specific aspect of one. So one that I read a really, really interesting like sort of think piece on that made me want to talk about it was, so the movie is the first Pokemon movie.
Okay. Like the cartoon?
I know. Like the cartoon, yeah. You know another Pokemon?
Well, there was. I suppose there was that weird Pikachu movie, which was like
Detective Pikachu. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't. Yeah. Okay.
I'm dressed as him today, so.
Love it.
No. No. So basically, the thing that I read was a really, really in depth, like, and I mean really, really in depth breakdown and analysis of. So obviously the movie originally is Japanese, and then was translated into English, but they actually rewrote the movie, and obviously obviously they're going to redub it anyway, but they actually rewrote the movie for the English version. They like recut it as well, like ever so slightly, but in like really weird ways and like really like meaningless ways as well. Like there's like, for instance, like at one point they just like cut out some footage, and then they literally like play the same like bit of footage twice instead of like the footage that they cut out. And the analysis I was reading was just like, I cannot think of any reason whatsoever why they did this. There's like, it literally makes absolutely zero sense. But yeah, basically, the original, I mean the rewrite wasn't like, it's not like a completely different film, because it's still using all the same footage and stuff. But they do change, like, so the overall message of the movie is effectively the thing that's changed. The message of the dub version, so the like American dub version, the sort of a Western version of the Pokemon movie, is that fighting is wrong, which the movie always kind of gets like flack for, because obviously the sort of premise of Pokemon is
that you're fighting, yeah.
Yeah, you make these like animals fight for you. So to suddenly like have a movie where like the ending message is all fighting is wrong no matter what is just really confusing.
That would have been very confusing if you were a fan of the program as well, because if you've watched it for however long it was on, in every episode they were fighting.
Exactly. In the movie they fight, like the whole movie's about like a fighting tournament. It's really, really bizarre. Like I've no idea, and again, like the analysis I was reading was just like, I have no idea why they would make these changes. Other changes include things like characters just like outright getting Pokemon's name wrong. Like there will be like a Pokemon on screen, and then the character will just refer to it as a completely different one, which is also just really bizarre because
Yeah.
like as like the analysis pointed out, it's like all we have to do, like they have the script in front of them, all they have to do is look at it to see the name of the Pokemon.
Yeah.
So it's actually impressive that they've messed it up. But yeah, the message of the original, because the movie sort of centers on like cloning. Like there's like all these Pokemon clones, so the message of the original is effectively like, you know, it doesn't really matter the sort of circumstances of your birth, like we're all sort of equal in the end, which is obviously like a nice sort of message for like a kids movie. There is like, I think in the original there is like some sort of nice like philosophical moments and stuff as well. Like I think they genuinely tried to put some like depth into a kids movie and not just have it be like a sort of mindless movie, which I appreciate. But yeah, that one was one that really sort of stood out to me because like the movie had like a solid script, and then they just
why would you
rewrote
change it? Because it's not even
exactly
like
to
it's not like America's notoriously like anti-violence. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not like they changed it for cultural
exactly
reasons. Like
exactly yeah, it's really really bizarre. So yeah, no one can really figure out like, what was going on there. But yeah, I thought it'd be a bit more of an interesting one to talk about because again, like the movie was actually made and released and then rewritten and then released in a different territory as a different film, effectively.
how bizarre.
I know.
But did they do it with
I
the
know.
TV show? No. Was that just released as is?
I
Obviously
think so.
dubbed
Yeah, I
differently.
mean, obviously it was dubbed. Yeah, but I think it was. I think there's like famous examples of like episodes that are cut and stuff. Like I'm pretty sure there's like a band episode where certain characters get hold of a gun or something like that. I think there's like some weird stuff that happens. Yeah, I think there's some weird stuff that happens in like the original TV show that they just kind of like America was like, yeah, we're just gonna pass that one by.
Yeah, fair.
But yeah, with this major movie, it was just like a really weird choice of them to do. But anyway, on to my second choice, which was kind of one of the reasons I wanted to do this and talk about it. And it was one of the first times I ever maybe thought about this. So it's a movie that came out in 2013 by our boy Scotty Riddles. I don't know if you've seen it because not a lot of people have, as far as I'm aware. But it's the Michael Fassbender film, The Counselor.
No, I haven't.
No, I didn't think so. Javier Bardem and Cameron Diaz are in it as well. And I went to see it at the time in the cinema because obviously I was big into Ridley Scott and big into Michael Fassbender as well. So I was like, okay, this is going to be good. And I saw a review before going to see it that talked about the fact that it was a very well written movie, but was not a great movie. And I remember thinking, like, how can that be possible? Like, how can you have a movie that's very well written but not be great? Especially because
I find
like,
that
Michael
actually.
Fassbender in it.
Sorry, I find that actually while I was like trying to do research and stuff for this one, it was difficult to find because the script is such a huge important part of the movie that if the script is bad, generally the movie is bad.
Exactly.
And if the script is good, it's obviously got a good story, good dialogue. The worst you could do is have like a terrible actor. It's just it was. I did think this was quite difficult, so that's interesting that was like the other way about.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I genuinely remember just being mystified by it, especially because like good director, good like cast. So I was like, how did they possibly go wrong with this? And so the situation is, it's weird, and this is the thing I guess when it comes to writing is like, there's good writing doesn't mean any one thing. Neither does like bad writing. Like people sometimes like to make it seem like it does, but you can have like good plotting. You can have good dialogue. You can have like excellent characters. You can have like great twists. There's all these different like aspects of like films that people love. Like, and it's funny because like again, I guess another example would be Star Wars Empire Strikes Back.
Do you know when you were talking about dialogue there, that was the exact thing that was popping into my head.
Exactly. Like it's not exactly Shakespeare, the dialogue, but at the same time, it is renowned for having like one of the sort of best movie twists of all time, and obviously the visuals and the sound design go a really long way. But with The Counselor, what it is the dialogue. So it's written by Cormac McCarthy, who's a sort of American writer he wrote a book called The Road, which I don't know if you've ever seen. They did a movie adaptation of that, which it's a really gripping novel, also really dull in a lot of parts. And The Counselor is kind of like quite similar, I guess, in that sense. It's a very odd movie. There's some really really strange parts to it, and the thing is like a lot of like a lot of what's said is like a lot of what's shown and sort of happening is sort of symbolic, and obviously like there's a lot of subtext, and a lot of the writing is like really beautiful in the sense that there's a lot of really beautiful dialogue, and but it's just overall the film's just a bit, it doesn't really, it's not a great film. Like it kind of it does kind of read almost like it's been a very long time since I've seen it, but from what I remember of it, it's almost just like quite pretentious and quite sort of slow, and not that much happens, and there's not really that much of a payoff to things, and it's quite contemplative as well. So it is a weird one. It is like a bit of an oxymoron of a film, because even like the performances and stuff are really good, and I'm pretty sure there was some like really good directing and really good cinematography and stuff as well. I'm sure the score, don't remember having any issues with it at least. But yeah, overall it's just like it was kind of hard to care about the film.
I think movies that are really like a slow burn tend to kind of automatically have that overly pretentious feel to them. So that
Absolutely.
I think if it's a slow burn, especially with a movie, because you know going into a movie that it's going to be probably at least an hour and a half long. If it's a slow burn, there's every possibility that you could just be like, nope.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it doesn't end, from what I remember, it doesn't really end on that like big a note. It ends on kind of like I think it ends on more of like a sort of contemplative note. It doesn't feel like it really like wraps things up all that satisfyingly. And so as a result, you're kind of just left there feeling like, oh, I guess that was the film. Rather than like actually feeling anything like a bit more like anything a bit stronger. So yeah, those are the two examples I had of like movies with maybe scripts that were better than the finished product would suggest. Because I feel like The Counsellor probably would have read better than it would have like played on screen, you know, especially because like the actual like style of the writing I think was the strength, so it might have actually played better as a text rather than or even as a screenplay than as an actual finished film. But just quickly, so the movies that I wanted to mention where I felt like the actual script was worth like singling out. I read the script for In Bruges last year, and I mean that's a phenomenal film anyway, but like reading the script made me just really appreciate just how I don't know, have you seen In Bruges?
I haven't, no.
No, it's a fantastic film, but and one of the clever things about it is it feels a lot of what feels like it feels like a lot of what's happening is kind of random and aimless, and it's very like sort of like it's a very sort of funny film, and very dark, and it does just kind of feel like at first it kind of feels like it's a bit all over the place in terms of like what's going on, and doesn't really feel as much like trajectory, but by the end everything pays off, like every single thing. It's ridiculous, like pretty much every joke that's in there is in there for a reason, no matter, and when you're watching it you would honestly be hard pressed to ever like everything that happens you'd be thinking like this is just like another random thing that's happening, but it pays everything off, and it's not like everything pays off in this one like incident and that's how everything pays off. It's like everything has its own separate payoff, and some things obviously do pay off together, but there is like one little like setup will have like a small little payoff later on, and it's just again it was just like a really genius piece of writing, because you don't realize how much work it's doing as you're reading or as you're watching it until like you're getting through it, and even then it could be quite easy to miss that like things happen and you're like, okay, that was actually set up earlier on with a joke, because it seems so throwaway, and sometimes even the payoff seems really throwaway or happens really fast, so you don't really think, which I think is why reading it helps you kind of like pick it up a lot better, because you obviously like have to take your time a bit more with the reading than you do when you're watching something, whereas like something can just like pass you by in the blink of an eye. But yeah, In Bruges is like one of the best scripts I've ever read. It's pretty much like flawless in terms of just like the way it's composed. Another one I want to mention, and this is very, very, very mainstream, and it feels weird to like single it out and give it praise. I think I can't remember if I have done on this podcast before or not, but I feel like, you know, the movie's sort of unanimously loved, but it's not, I don't think it's talked about often enough in terms of like the strength of its writing because of like the type of movie it is, and that's Avengers Infinity War. Which no, I know, but I genuinely think like the movie juggles so many characters at the same time, And watching it, if you like break it down like scene by scene, every scene in it is so brief and does so much work for the film. Like pretty much every single character that's introduced. The movie, I think that's like, I was having this conversation the other day. Like, that's maybe the last like big Marvel movie that doesn't assume that you've seen every Marvel movie, or at least the big ones, because it very much
I think kind of that's sometimes my issue with the Marvel movies, because it feels like if you don't know everything about the Marvel universe, then you're almost like alienated, and it doesn't really endear you to watching the movies.
Yeah, that's it. At this point, you're pretty much like locked out of them, and there's so many of them that it would take you so long to actually like catch up. That if you're out, then you're going to be out at this point. And I think Infinity War, I think, was the last time that they like really, really tried to be like, okay, if you haven't seen any, like, we need to make sure that if someone hasn't seen any of these, that they can get caught up. And it's not like, the movie does not like hold your hand, like it is really quick, but it does give you like a quick like a sort of succinct picture of every character as they're sort of being introduced, and at the same time the sort of movie does move at like this breakneck pace, and obviously like all these different plots kind of like coalesce in their own ways. There's loads of sort of surprises, there's really like strong payoffs, and it's crazy. I mean, the movie ends on a cliffhanger, but there's also like, it is also a contained movie in its own way, so it is like really, really sort of intelligently done, but yeah, I mean, there's so many people out there who love it, but I feel like no one ever really notices, because again, like, you have like people like Martin Scorsese who obviously love to bash the Marvel movies, and I understand why, but I do think that like people kind of fail to notice sometimes like that there is so much work that has obviously gone into writing that to getting it to the point where it's just like that economical.
Yeah, because I feel like sometimes I'm a bit guilty of that. And maybe it's just slight bitterness because I haven't seen them and because I've been alienated from them. But yeah, no, that's really interesting that it's... Because you could easily, because it's already made so much money and it continues to make so much money, Marvel as a thing, that you could just kind of phone it in, couldn't you?
Exactly. And I appreciate the fact that they don't, that they genuinely do seem to like still scout talent, and sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully, but yeah, they genuinely do seem to like try and push, and they actually do have like a bar of quality that they sort of aim to hit. Again, they don't always succeed, but like they at least do like try, so I appreciate that. And the very last one I wanted to quickly mention was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I mean, which again is like one of the most famous screenplays anyway, but I wanted to mention it because I have actually not seen the film.
No.
But I have read the script, and reading the script was such a good time.
Well, that's funny because I watched it for the first time fairly recently, and I had such a good time watching it. Like,
really?
I enjoyed it much more than I thought I was going to.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's it. It is terrific, and the writing in it is like so solid. And I read it as part of this book that basically is by the writer William Goldman, and he talks a lot about like his process behind writing it. And then he actually breaks down the script and talks about like, because the script is different from the movie. There's like things that were omitted and stuff, and he discusses that. He discusses why like certain things were changed, and the sort of meanings of things that like maybe like changed along the way. And again, it just like it was a really interesting experience reading a script for a sort of renowned film, but without ever having seen it.
Yeah.
So I'd recommend it at some point if there's a movie. Probably better with like older films where like you maybe are going to like not struggle to watch it, but it has dated in some respects. I think probably like some older films probably do have like some great scripts that you can read and would probably be like just as enjoyable a read as it would be like an actual watch.
Yeah, no, that's a good shout.
Thank you. But anyway, I'll stop talking about scripts now, and let us get on to the next of our 4 sections, which is cinematography. And again, I have a very, very, very like big example for this one that basically just justifies the existence of it. But I'm very interested to hear your picks.
So this one specifically, I tried to think of movies that when I thought about the movie, I thought about the way that it looked, and mostly about the way that it looked, as opposed to, oh yeah, that movie was great because it had a great story or it had that great scene. When I was trying to think of them, I was like, what movies have I seen that I was watching and I was like, oofed, that looks amazing. And I tried to pick ones that were maybe, because there's so many movies with amazing cinematography that the film is amazing, everything about it.
Yeah.
So I tried to pick ones that again, like I was saying, that I maybe didn't remember as much, or the plot maybe wasn't there. So yeah, so my first choice was Memoirs of a Geisha. Have you seen it?
I've never seen that. No, I have not.
Is
it good?
It's good,
Wow.
yeah. I've read the book as well. I think the book was probably better than the movie.
Did you read the book first or
Yes.
after you'd seen the film?
No, I read the book first.
Nice.
But this, I feel like this movie is, when I was looking it up, actually, the cinematographer won for best cinematography. So it's
good then.
Yeah, I feel like it's the best thing about it is obviously like the whole point of a geisha, and they're kind of like just supposed to epitomize like this idea of like poise and grace and beauty, and I feel like the cinematography in this movie kind of like encapsulates that, where there are points of the movie where it's just stunning, like it's a gorgeous movie, and there's a lot of like there's a lot of really, really wide shots where he just uses the background perfectly, where it just, because there are some shots, you've maybe seen it where she's a young girl and she's like running through this kind of like, I don't know what you would call it, but there's all these kind of like archway type things, and it like runs all the way along, but you follow her as she's running through it, and it just looks, it's the kind of thing where as a film student, if you stumbled across that location in real life, you'd be like, oh, I want to shoot something here. One of those.
Yeah. Yep, fair.
And there was definitely a lot of that in the movie. Yeah, but I feel like the thing, as I was saying, the thing that makes it stand out the most is that I feel like it made sense for this movie, for the cinematography to be the way it was, because there were points as well in it where the colours were really, really vibrant and it was very colourful, and then there were other moments where it was like maybe when it was her in a kind of an older geisha, where they were like kind of just in the room, kind of talking, getting ready, things like that, and it was very muted. All the colours were quite muted. It wasn't lit as much as like the outdoor scenes and things like that. So I feel like the cinematographer for this just kind of perfectly understood the movie, the tone of the movie, what the book was about, obviously the source material, and he just did a banging job, if I'm honest.
Fair. I think again it's going to be a really difficult thing to do, to like take a text and to actually represent everything that's in there as visually as possible.
Mm-hmm. Especially because the book is very like, it's quite a thick book, and they do spend a lot of time telling you kind of like where they are, and but the whole story is about her becoming a geisha, so it's not, other than like actual locations, it's not massively important what her background looks like. So I think kind of translating that to film is just, in that instance, done like perfectly. I feel like you could have very easily have gone a different way with that movie, and maybe done a lot of like close-ups and kind of like medium shots where it was just like, oh, look how gorgeous this woman is. But instead they've kind of gone, look how gorgeous this world is.
Yeah.
And she's kind of like and she's kind of like the center of it, which is very nice.
I think I like that in films when like the person filming it is obviously very clearly not just in love with like a character or whatever, but actually like everything they're showing you, like there just genuinely feels like there's a love for like what you're seeing on the screen.
Mm-hmm. I think definitely with cinematography you can feel and see when like when they are passionate about the story, and when they kind of fully understand the story, as opposed to they've stumbled across a location and thought that looks cool.
Yeah,
we'll incorporate this into the script somehow. But yeah, so my second choice was the movie Skyfall, and I chose this one.
Excellent pick.
Because I'm not a big Bond fan. Haven't seen a lot of Bond movies. The only ones I think I've seen are the Daniel Craig ones. I've seen one. Yeah. Of the old ones, and it was god awful.
More of the old ones than I've seen, to be fair.
Yeah. I can't even remember I think it was Goldfinger, maybe? Anyway, I can't remember. And it was just awful. But I feel like the Daniel Craig movies, at least, with the exception of Quantum of Solace, which again was awful, I feel like they all have this kind of certain look, and it's very it doesn't feel necessarily like an action movie. Like, it doesn't give
Yeah.
off the same vibes as like Bourne movies or something like that, or
Yeah.
Taken. It feels like they've put a bit more kind of like care into the cinematography. And I think
Yeah, I think there's like a sort of elegance to it.
yeah, definitely. And I think Skyfall sort of encapsulates that most out of the movies that out of the Daniel Craig movies that I've seen. I think as well there's with the Bond movies that I've seen, there's tends to be kind of like lulls in the action. Obviously, it couldn't be action
Yeah.
the entire way through. But they kind of take advantage of the lulls and are like, "Ooh, look how gorgeous this is!" And because obviously Bond's like an international man of mystery, so he's going all over the joint. So it's such like a nice moment to be like to just kind of introduce the new place that he's in. Like, oh, here's Venice, and here's a little village in Spain. It's.
Yeah.
I feel like they do that very well, where it doesn't feel like a kind of sitcom where they just show the outside of a building and then you assume that
Yes.
they're in that building kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I remember seeing Skyfall in cinemas and being blown away by just how good it looks all the way through as well, because it goes from like, I think the fact as well is like it's also very like Britain heavy as well as like having these exotic locations. It has like London featured, and even it goes all the way up to Scotland, and it manages to do like a lot with like all of those settings. Every single one looks really distinct. But again, like sort of what we were talking about before, that it does feel like the movie is like in love with each of its settings.
Yeah.
And it's like really eager to sort of show them off. So yeah, I completely agree. Like I think it's a beautiful film. Do you remember there's a section, you know, when Javier Bardem's introduced, and he's living on an island.
Yep.
And Bond goes to see him there. So did you notice anything at all about like that location?
No, it was a while ago that I saw it last. I do
That's
remember
fair.
the
No,
exact
just-
bit because it kind of like it's just like a little island and it was like crammed full of buildings, wasn't it? But it had been abandoned.
Yeah, they're
or
all kind
something.
of like, yeah, they're all derelict.
Yeah.
So I only found this out recently. I was watching I was just watching like a sort of filmmaking video on YouTube, and Roger Deakins was talking about Skyfall, and he was the cinematographer in that. So the island that they found like Javier Bardem on, none of the actors ever visited. And
Is
in
that
fact,
is it because it's like a condemned? It was disease or something had
no,
spread out there. No.
it's even like less interesting than that. It was just cheaper for them not to. So
Amazing.
basically, and to make it even crazier, what they're walking through isn't even like video footage. They're walking through still photographs. So I think it was Roger Deakins went out
That's
the
insane.
location scouting and took all these pictures of this island and then was like showing them to the director and stuff. The director loved it. He was like, we'll fly everyone out there, we'll film it. And I think it was Roger Deakins was like, you know, we could just green screen it. And like basically, so if you watch it again, now that you know this, it will be incredibly obvious because I'd like looked at clips of it after. And what they've done is they've CGI'd in certain like elements and they move. So there's like curtains and stuff. And
Okay.
like, you know, like torn fabrics and stuff that are like blowing
Or like in the
wind.
windows and stuff.
Exactly. But
Excuse
the
me.
actual location itself, bless you. Yeah, the location itself is literally they're just walking on pictures, which to me was just like that is insane that is just in this film.
That is crazy.
And I've never noticed it before, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about it because, like you said, the cinematography is stunning in that film.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was a lot of location shooting as well.
That's
but yeah,
crazy.
sorry, just had to point that out when the chance was there.
Yeah, no fair. What were your picks?
So I'll start with I'll hold off the bigger one for a second.
Okay.
But I'll continue in the sort of theme. I mean, well, this was released the same year as Skyfall. And continuing my theme from the last one of slating Ridley Scott movies after praising him before. Prometheus was one of my picks. Because, and obviously I've talked about that movie before. It's a very like the movie's a bit all over the place. It has a lot of flaws. But one thing that like it blows me away every single time, you know, you notice it in the trailers,
Yeah.
is the movie is just shot phenomenally well. You know, I think they filmed a lot of it like in Iceland, And there's so many like interesting shots. There's so many just like it does such a good job of like really selling the scale of this world and the sort of journey that they're on. I think like the cinematography actually does more than like any other department in that sense, like of really making you feel like they are going like far away into this big empty sort of alien planet where this like ancient culture kind of like existed at one point. There's just so many like incredible shots, and there's so many like incredibly shot sequences as well. You know, I think the best sequence in the film is the C-section scene, and that like and obviously like so much of that is down to just like the way that it's shot. Obviously, like editing plays a big part in sound design and stuff, but and acting of course. But I do think like even that is just like everything in it is just shot like incredibly. It really does feel like. I guess it kind of feels like obviously it is an homage to like Greek mythology with like the literally being called Prometheus, and it does feel like it was almost shot like this sort of regal, almost shot like you get these like big marble sort of like Greek palaces and stuff. It does kind of feel like that's the world that they're like depicting, but just like an alien version of that. So I think it feels like there's a lot of like meaning behind the cinematography in that one. So yeah, like Prometheus was one of my picks just for like, if for nothing else, the movie just looks like absolutely beautiful.
No, that's such a good one. I definitely would think when I think of Prometheus, there's like a couple of things I would think about, but the way that it looks is definitely one of them. And because I feel like the whole, like you were saying, like the trailer, I remember people being buzzing, I think we've spoken about this before, being buzzing for it after watching the trailer just because it looked so good. And I think as well because if you know, obviously it was kind of like a prequel to Alien. It felt very much like, almost like because Alien was so kind of claustrophobic and just within the one spaceship, with a couple other scenes obviously, this kind of felt more like he was making a conscious effort to kind of like explore the outside, which was nice.
Yeah, it's very, very like that's the opposite, isn't it? It goes the other way from the claustrophobia, which you kind of got like flack for at the time. But yeah, it's a very bold choice. Like again, if for nothing, like it is worth mentioning that like it doesn't just go take like the easy route of being a prequel and just do like an alien movie with like different characters, but it actually does tries to build out the world in a sort of interesting way, and it does a lot of that visually. So that was my first pick, and then my second pick, which again is like the justification for this. And this is a bit of a controversial one because I know that the movie is like very, very sort of highly regarded, but it just does not do it for me. And that's The Tree of Life.
Do you know what?
It's Malick film.
I haven't seen it because I've seen clips of it and I'm like, not for me.
Yeah, exactly. The movie is just like, it's a cinematography tour de force, but that's about it. It's just like all visual porn basically, and it's one of those things where like if it emotionally resonates with you, then you're in for like a great ride, and I think it's like one of the most like sort of affecting films. But for me, like I just it was just like 3 hours. I think it's like 3 hours long. If not, it felt like it. Of just like again. Visual beauty, but the thing is like it gets harder and harder to care about that when you really don't care about anything that's going on screen.
No, that's 100% fair. Because I feel like even when people talk about the movie, if someone was to ask you like what's it about, who knows what that movie's about.
Whatever you want it to be about.
It's up to you.
Like Tree of Life can be a Christmas film if you want it to be.
Exactly.
I don't care.
If you argue properly.
Yeah, exactly. There's definitely an argument to be made in there. Anyway, I think that'll do for cinematography. But yeah, lovely picks.
Thank you.
And so next we're going to discuss sort of one of the final sort of stages of movie making, post-production phase, which is editing. So Catherine, what were your picks for notable editing?
Well, of course, editing is something that we both love. And we both love doing. No, I hate editing. I have nothing but respect for editors because I find it so difficult.
Same.
And so I've gone a couple of different ways for this one. So the first one I'll mention is Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes movies.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, because I feel like obviously Guy Ritchie's got he's got a very specific style, and a lot of that is like in his editing and the slow-mo and stuff like that. And I feel like Sherlock Holmes is like for me the kind of perfect example of why it works. And I feel like Guy Ritchie was the perfect choice to make a Sherlock Holmes movie, because I mean, I haven't read the books, but a lot of, like, obviously Sherlock Holmes is like this master deducer, if you will. And Guy Ritchie's editing techniques very much lend himself to the movie, because it kind of highlights Sherlock's kind of thought process, and it doesn't hit you over the head with like clunky exposition or anything. But at the same time, it is just Sherlock Holmes saying, "Here's what I'm doing and why," and then it's funny that it works, because he says, like, especially like the kind of fight scenes, he says, "Here's what I'm going to do, boom, 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 boom," and you see it in slow-mo, and then you see it in real time as well. And it's weird that just immediately after that, but it still works. It doesn't feel like you're like, "Ugh, why are they doing that again?" It doesn't feel like a repeat or anything, which is odd. But I think it's just a really fun, kind of cool way for it to work, for you to kind of understand more about the character of Holmes, how his thought process works, and, as I say, the kind of like expositional tool as well, which is
exactly,
which is really cool.
I think it's a really, really good example, and I think it does a good job of, like, as you say, it's like motivated editing. It's like it builds his character as well, because it literally shows you like how sort of smart he is, how like quick he thinks. It also is just like an interesting way of like having action scenes in the film as well. Like it adds just like an extra layer on top of that, and like it is like really well executed as well. Like I think it's a very, very interesting pick, and I think as well the second one. I mean, I've got such a soft spot for the second Sherlock Holmes film. Like, I love that movie so much.
Fair, it's a good movie.
And in that, I love the fact that they know that you obviously have seen the first one, and you know the whole like trick with him like saying what he's gonna do and then doing it, and they like turn that on its head. Where there's like points where he gets it wrong, because like another character like interferes, or even like, and again, one of like the best things ever is like the showdown with him and Moriarty, and the two of them just have like a fight without ever having a fight, because they both just like work out exactly what they're going to do and who would win the fight.
Yeah, because they're playing chess at the time as well, aren't they? But they're not moving the pieces. Is that right?
They are. I think they are moving the pieces, but what they're also doing is like inside they have Sherlock's got Watson and the gypsy lady, whose name I can't remember.
I can't remember
that. And played by Noomi Rapace, who's also in Prometheus. These movies like keep having connections.
Amazing, I love it.
And obviously Moriarty's got his people inside, and it's this, as they're playing chess outside, really what they're doing is obviously like discussing their plan going on inside. And again, it's just like such a great, because that's such a cliched thing, like the hero and villain like playing chess, but it's done in such like a perfect way in that film. Sorry, I've got taken as like wildly off, like not wildly off topic, but I've just started gushing about these films.
No, fire away. No, but I think I've got such a love for those movies, which is funny because I wouldn't say I was the biggest Guy Ritchie fan. Like, I appreciate what he does, but it's normally not something that I would choose to seek out, kind of thing. But on a very kind of different plane, the other movie I went for was Drive with Ryan Gosling. And
interesting.
The reason I went for this one is because I wanted to talk more about kind of like sound editing for this particular one. I feel like, obviously, you and I as film students and not sound students, we tend to not really put huge amounts of, like, I don't know what you would say, not thought, but it's not the most important thing to us normally, I would argue.
Yeah.
But I feel like Drive is just a perfect example of how well sound can be used, and especially a movie like Drive where there's so little dialogue. The sound almost kind of becomes another kind of character within the film, where it's just as important as kind of Ryan Gosling's character or Carey Mulligan's character. So I think as well, I was struggling to think of a huge amount of other movies that do this. Another movie obviously that does it very well is Baby Driver, but it uses more kind of like music, whereas Drive definitely kind of hinges just on kind of sound effects and stuff like that. The bit that I always remember is, have you seen Drive?
I have a very, very long time ago,
Fair.
and I remember very little of it, unfortunately.
Yeah. The bit that I always remember is the kind of first getaway scene where he's in the car, and it's that whole thing. I don't think he says, like, I think he explains himself in the beginning, like, here's the deal, you need to be out by this time, this is when I'm leaving, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's very, very short, very succinct. And then the rest of it is obviously he's listening to the kind of police radio, he's trying to see what's happening there, there's the sound of the cars, there's the sound of the robbery going on in the background. And I just feel like that's just a perfect scene because the the sounds kind of create such a great tension, because there's one point where he like starts the car and he starts to rev and he's getting his, like, he's got his gloves on, so he's getting ready for the steering wheel, and it's just like perfect. And I think it's such a weird movie because there is so little dialogue on it, and there's a lot of potentially boring scenes where there's just a lot of Ryan Gosling looking at people. But I think the sound actually makes up for all of that. I think that's the best part of the movie. And had it not been such a huge part of the movie, I don't think that it would have been particularly watchable, to be honest, in my opinion.
No, it's a very, very good example actually of like how much, especially like you say with it being minimalistic in dialogue, it's kind of evocative of like A Quiet Place in that sense, where. And that's obviously using the lack of dialogue as like its kind of gimmick, but by having like less dialogue, you are sort of forced to pay more attention to like the visual and the sort of audio, and I think it's quite a clever trick, and it's obviously very, very difficult to do. It requires a lot of confidence as well to actually like tell a story with like as few words, as like those sort of movies do. It's one of the things that I really like about Denis Villeneuve's films, is I feel like he really, really does not lean on dialogue.
Yeah, because he did Arrival,
like,
didn't he? That's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, exactly. He also did Blade Runner 2049 and obviously Dune, which again I talked about last time, but the fact that like I feel like it does so much with just like its visuals and its sound over actually like just like expositing everything. I think it's a real like strength when a filmmaker can do that. So yeah, no, really, really solid pick.
Thank you.
For Drive.
What did you go for?
So my pick, funnily enough, you just mentioned,
No way.
And it's not Drive. So again, controversially, I was going to pick Baby Driver, because as much as like I enjoyed the film, I think I've only seen it the once. As much as like I had a good time with it, I didn't. I thought I would love it a lot more than I did, and I don't think. I think really thinking about it, I was like, the editing is like the enjoyable thing about it, because it's obviously like, I mean, there's that whole thing about like they were editing it like on set every day, basically. Like they were editing it as they went so that they could make sure everything like sort of synced up with like the
Can you
songs
imagine? That's like nightmare fuel, trying to edit a film on the set. Like I don't even want to think about that.
I know. Although at the same time, like at least when the movie's shot, then you're miles ahead with how you edit, and you know that like that complicated process works. So I appreciate like the amount of obviously like patience and time and thought and everything that went into actually making this movie like work the way that it does. That's the thing, like it probably is like the best example of editing in a film, because it's just like so noticeable but not in a bad way. Usually if an aspect of filmmaking calls attention to itself, it's usually a negative thing, but like the editing and Baby Driver is just like so on point, that you kind of can't help but like love it.
No, that's a good point, because I 100% get what you mean. Like I did enjoy it, and I did find myself asking people, have you seen it? And then telling them the fun fact about the editing thing. And then after that, I just don't have a huge amount of interest in it anymore.
Exactly, and I don't think like the story I didn't really care for the direction the story went.
I didn't really care about the characters, to be honest.
Yeah, well, many of the actors have come out as like sex offenders since the movie has not aged well.
No, and it only came out recently, so
exactly. Yeah, it's not even 5 years old yet. It's not even 4 years old. But oh no, it's almost 5 years old. But it's the one thing that will never sort of like, the one thing the movie will always have is it is edited incredibly well. So I felt like it worth talking about. Another examples that I had, I mean, the other main example that came to mind, but I wasn't going to really spend a lot of time talking about it just because we kind of discussed this last time, was again House of Gucci, where I think the movie had a lot of problems, but I think I talked about how good some of the scene transitions were. And
oh yeah, you did.
there was, I think one that I didn't mention that I really liked was so what's the actor's name? The British guy with the terrible accent.
Jeremy Irons.
Yes, thank you. His like last scene with his when he's obviously talking to his son ends with him like going to like lean back into his chair, and then it literally just like cuts straight into like his corpse in his coffin.
Yeah, that's funny.
And I genuinely remember I was no, but it is though, and it's I saw like a comment online mentioning that and just being like, I don't know if that was like a written thing or if like the editor was genuinely just having a laugh with the movie because it's so weird.
They're like, this is a long movie, let's just cheer myself
I'm gonna have whatever fun I can with this thing, especially if you're editing like something of that length.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I genuinely thought like that was one of the movie's strengths by far was its editing. So I felt it worth mentioning. And then I was also going to mention, I really wasn't going to talk about it in great detail, because again, like it's been spoke about more than often enough, but I just wanted to mention the fact that obviously Star Wars, the original one at least, there's all these talks about how like that movie was basically saved by its edit, you know, like the movie was, while it was being made, everyone involved had no faith in it, you know. And looking at the script and stuff and a lot of the early concepts and stuff, you can kind of see why. And it was obviously very low budget, filmed in a desert and stuff. But it really was like the edit where the movie came out, or the movie that we know as Star Wars came out. And again, you get that with like, as you talked about with like, the sound design and stuff, like how much of an important aspect that all plays.
Yeah.
Like
especially something like Star Wars, where it really helps to like create that kind of like otherworldly vibe where there's noises that you don't recognize for like lightsabers or speeders and things like that.
Yeah, it's so clever in the use of just like the way it appropriates sound and completely recontextualizes them, and just you never you know, a lot of the sounds are like not necessarily familiar sounds, but they're just like they're not even like crazy distorted or like mashed in. Some of the sounds are just like animal sounds.
Yeah.
And yet they just sound, you never watch it and think of like those animals. You're just thinking of like what the movie's showing you. It just lends itself this like otherworldly quality. So yeah, those are the ones I kind of wanted to mention.
Very cool.
So thank you. So that concludes editing, which means we're now into the last section, which is probably the hardest one to kind of define and discuss, but I thought it'd be fun to have a go anyway. And the last section is directing. So what examples do you have of films where you think direction is either notable or the opposite?
So for this one, I had kind of cheated and split this up into like a directing section and then just like kind of performance, which is obviously affected by the direction. That's my justification.
Exactly.
So the first one I wanted to mention was my main man, David Fincher. And just every one of his movies. No, I'm kidding. The one I chose specifically was Gone Girl.
Okay.
And the reason I chose this was because I'm not a massive fan of Ben Affleck or Rosamund Pike. I don't think either of them were particularly amazing. But in this movie, they were like superb. And that's, I think, partly down to skill, partly down to perfect casting. But also, as we've spoken about before, Fincher's notorious for doing like scene upon scene upon scene upon scene, like takes. Sorry, I just feel like I feel like David Fincher's such a perfect example of clearly that works, because obviously all of his movies have great actors and stuff in them, but he's obviously doing something right to get that kind of performance out of them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I feel like their inclusion in that film is even better as well when you think about the parts of the film that doesn't work, which is mainly Neil Patrick Harris. I don't know if the main casting director was maybe off that day, or whether they'd cast Rosamund Pike and Ben Affleck and was like, phew, I need a day off after that, and then someone else came in to cast him. Because again, I read the book before I read the movie. And when I found out that he was playing the character he was playing, I was like, what? That must be a mistake. And then I watched the movie and I was like, yes, it was a mistake. It was just no harm to him, but it was just not a role for him. I think he tried his best, but no, just did not work. But I've gone off on a tangent anyway.
I appreciate the tangent now. Neil Patrick Harris, if you're listening, Catherine's coming for you.
Yeah, maybe just stick to like low-key terrible comedy.
I mean, having seen The Matrix Resurrections and his role in that, then I'd kind of agree.
Yeah.
Sorry, Neil.
And then to go into like actual performance and like the performers themselves, one that of course I wanted to mention, I don't know if you'll mention him as well because we have spoken about this movie and our love for this movie before, and that's Matthew Lillard as Shaggy in Scooby-Doo.
Oh, amazing.
I feel like that is a perfect example of someone who just understood their job. He knew exactly what he needed to be, and that's exactly what he delivered. And it was everything that the movie needed it to be.
Completely agree. I completely agree.
And he's such like, I feel like everyone in that movie is very well cast and does a really good job, but Shaggy just kind of is elevated above the rest of them. And it's his performance that does it.
He's I mean, aside from the talking dog, he has like the hardest one, I think, to actually like to portray, and he's also arguably like the main character as well. So he really does have like the toughest job, and his performance is just so good.
Yeah, and I feel like of course that's a good point because he'll spend most of his time talking to the talking dog that's not actually there. Spoiler alert.
Exactly.
But yeah, that was one that always kind of stands out. Like, God, I feel like he was probably having a great time, and so that when you're watching it, you're feeling it as well. I mean, we've spoken about it before. Those movies are great, and he's definitely a big part of that. Another one I wanted to mention was a movie that you've already spoken about, and that's Michael Fassbender in Prometheus.
Oh wow!
I feel like
a double mention of Prometheus.
I think because his name is David, isn't it, in the movie?
Yep.
I feel like he's definitely one of the points in the movie that's memorable. I think as well I really appreciate it because it could have been very like almost like campy and robotic, and it could have just been very over the top, but it's so good in that you can tell that there's something just a bit off about him. There's something a bit weird. And
it's so like indescribable, isn't it? Like the unsettling like sort of feeling you get from him, because I don't think he ever really does anything. It sort of starts to do like investigation stuff, but like right from the very beginning you're just like, this guy's really sinister, and I don't know why. Yeah,
because he was so polite and he was always smiling, and he kind of like, it was like a better version of like a Stepford Wife.
Yes.
And I feel like what I really appreciated was because he's obviously kind of like a predecessor to Ian Holm's character in Alien. And obviously the whole point of his character in Alien is that, spoiler, you don't know that he's a robot.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it feels really clever that there's something a bit off about him, and it's almost like they've tweaked it so that by the time they get to the character in Alien, he's perfected and he can fool everyone and no one suspects that he's a robot. Point.
Yeah, there's like a sort of uncanny valley thing going on with Michael Fassbender that they obviously like have smoothened by the time that Ash comes along.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like it could have been like, have you ever seen Galaxy Quest?
I have seen Galaxy Quest. Yeah,
I feel like if it could have been very like, the people from that weird planet and they speak in that weird way.
That's where you were going.
Yeah, with that. I feel like that could have been where that went, but luckily it did not. Not that there's anything wrong with Galaxy Quest, but I feel like it wouldn't quite have fitted with the tone.
No, exactly.
And then one last one I wanted to mention, because I am not a fan of this movie at all, and this was the only point in the movie where I was like, eh. And that was Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner as Timon and Pumbaa in The Lion King.
Okay.
I feel like what I've written here is they were the only semi-bright spot in that hellhole of a movie.
Fair enough. Again, I have not seen it.
Oh, I went to the cinema to see it, and I'm actually angry that I did. I'm angry with myself. But it was one of the few moments where I was watching it and I was like, yeah, they're actually all right, and that's as good as it got. But I think because the rest of the movie was so bad, I felt like they were even better than maybe they were.
Yeah.
Because they weren't a patch on the original Timon and Pumbaa. But I think they took it a bit more like they were taking the characters on themselves in a different way, as opposed to, I feel like everyone else was trying to play the characters in the originals. I mean,
but James Earl Jones.
Yeah, he did. So... And do you know what? I was disappointed in him in that movie because it felt like he had just lost who Mufasa was. It didn't feel like Mufasa. Which was bizarre because it's the same movie, the same characters, the same actor, but it's almost like he knew that the movie was not very good.
Yeah. His heart and soul wasn't in it.
Yeah, and you could feel it. But I feel like Seth Rogen and that, they were just having it was almost like they were just having a laugh, like, yeah, this will be what it is. And it kind of made up for some of the movie, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the one thing you'd want, isn't it? Is some levity, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that, like, again, they are supposed to be fun characters. I'm glad that, like, at least they were, like, good. And like you say, I think the fact that that's maybe the one of the things that, like, felt a little bit different.
Yeah.
Is it says a lot. That's what it needed. Like, that was, yeah. It was, the movie was always kind of doomed because of the fact that it's like. It had to be all CGI anyway, so you're basically making a cartoon of a cartoon rather than actually a live action movie of
And it was
cartoon.
weird because the bits that they added were just absolutely, like, there's a reason they weren't in the original because they were needless. Yeah. And I don't know anyone who watched The Lion King as a child and was like, do you know what I needed more of? The hyenas. No. There was a perfect amount of hyenas in the first movie.
Exactly, if that. So, yeah, fair. No, very, very good picks.
Cool.
And yeah, very, very interesting ones as well. I like your justifications for them. I love that Prometheus was on there twice.
Love it.
And I would agree as well. Like, Fassbender's incredible in that, as we've talked about before. So my picks are all. I've got sort of three main picks, and they're all very different, and they're all sort of picked for very different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
My first one was. So it's another, like, highly acclaimed movie that just did not do it for me.
Okay.
I went to see it in cinema way back in the day when it came out, and that is Birdman.
Do you know what? I actually still haven't seen it because I remember at the time thinking, ooh. I don't know if that's going to be my cup of tea. It looked very Oscar baity.
Yeah, I thought I would like it, and there's a lot of, like, aspects about it that I appreciate. Again, the performances are great. It's all shot as if it's like one continuous take.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot kind of going on. So it feels like, again, it's like a very well constructed movie. It's a very well directed movie, but again, it just doesn't really, for me, it just doesn't really work. Like, I didn't think it really needed to be like one long continuous take. Mm-hmm. Again, the performances were great, but I just didn't really care about any of the characters. I think there's, like, some nice themes and, like, some imagery and stuff in it, but again, like, it just all kind of, for me, it all just kind of felt flat. And the movie did just feel kind of very pretentious and Oscar baity, and I just found it really hard, like, really struggled to kind of, like, connect with it. So Birdman for me, it was, again, I remember thinking I was like, very well directed movie. I just didn't care for it at all.
Fair.
And kind of the same with The Revenant, to be honest. Where that was the same deal, same director. And I went to cinema to see it, and I was just like, yep, very well directed movie. Did not do it for me.
100% same, and I'm so glad you brought it up because everyone else that you bring up The Revenant to will defend it till the death, and they're ready to fight. And I'm like, I wasn't feeling it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's loads I appreciate about it, but I just don't care. And the movie, the premise is, like, really interesting. You know, like, someone gets, like, mauled by a bear, and then they basically, like, survive and go to take revenge. Yeah. And it's so, like, dull.
Yeah, and I feel like there was a lot of it that I couldn't really understand what anyone was saying because they had those weird gravelly, like, whispery accents, and it sounded like they were chatting with stuff in their mouth, and I was like, this isn't fun because I don't know I don't even know what you're saying.
Yeah, it felt really committed to like the authenticity of the time period, but I actually felt like that hurt it because I was just kind of like
100%.
I didn't really need like the authenticity. Like for me, it actually like it sort of soured it a little bit. It's one of those things where I wouldn't really have mind. It wouldn't really It wouldn't really bothered me if they put like a wee bit of like Hollywood sheen on it and like sort of fudge some elements for the sake of just like making it a bit more enjoyable and accessible.
Yeah, I would never class it as an enjoyable movie. It was, it
exactly.
was, it felt like it was a whole event. Like I've almost felt like tired after it.
Exactly, which I guess is like part of the point, but it just didn't feel like it. Some movies do that in like a really fulfilling way, and for me, that just didn't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so moving on from that, another one I wanted to talk about, and again, was just going to kind of touch on this briefly, but it just kind of came to mind because again, with the directing being so vague, I then started to look into, well, obviously you have like director's cuts and things, so then I was kind of looking, like going down that avenue. The one film that I thought of, and again, it's something we've not actually talked about that much, but we kind of have at the same time. So it's a sequel to a film that we both love, and it's Aliens.
Okay.
But obviously, with Aliens, they have a completely different director from Alien, which I think makes it a really interesting film because you suddenly have a continuation of this, like, you know, this Ridley Scott like sci-fi like obviously like masterpiece. And it's interesting because like James Cameron is obviously like, it is a very James Cameron film, Aliens. You know, he definitely has like a sort of love of horror, as you can sort of see in like the Terminator and stuff. But he's a bit more like you know, I guess romantic, and you know, you see that obviously with Titanic and what have you, and there is obviously like
Avatar,
a romance plot.
you could argue as well.
Exactly. And he also loves sort of like familial bonds, as you see in like the sort of Terminator movies. That really carries over into Alien. Well, I guess it was sort of created in Aliens. You sort of saw it there first, but yeah, it's interesting to me. Just like it works, you know, it is rightly regarded as like one of the best sequels of all time, but it actually changes so much from the original. It very much is like James Cameron's take on the Alien universe, and it just like it's an excellent film because of it. And I feel like that's, you know, it just by default is one of the best examples of just like how a different director can do something completely different, even with like the same characters and sort of world. So yeah, weirdly enough, I guess we talked about Prometheus as well. So the Alien universe is getting a lot of attention in this category. But yeah, the last one I wanted to talk about, again, for sort of slightly similar but also different reasons, was Solo: A Star Wars Story, which is,
I think that's
the Han
yes,
Solo one, which I did not care for at all, and you know, I had no interest in them. Did you?
I did, but that's funny because you're a Star Wars fan and I'm not.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Like when they announced they're making the movie, I was like, I don't really feel like there's a need for this. Like Han Solo's one of those characters that is better because you know less about him.
Like when we've spoken before about like villain kind of like origin stories where I'm like, part of the fun is that you don't know all the stuff about him. And Han Solo is such a good example of that. Like, that's such a weird
so much
one.
of his character comes from like throwaway lines, and then the movie obviously, as everyone sort of guessed, the movie goes out of its way to like show you all the things that he kind of talks about. And it does just kind of like take the magic out of it a little bit, and it also doesn't help that like he gets the same arc in Solo: A Star Wars Story that he then gets in A New Hope, which makes no sense. But the reason obviously I was mentioning it is because infamously the movie changed directors very late on in its production and was basically like completely reshot. And the original directors for the movie were Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who did the Lego Movie and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and 21 Jump Street. And I think the issue that Disney had with what they were doing with it was it didn't really fit their sort of style and what they kind of wanted. I think they were making more of a sort of like I guess like snappy, sort of quirky, inventive comedy, and they wanted more of a sort of conventional sci-fi action film. And I think that's maybe where they butted heads. And I would have loved, like honestly, I would love so much to just have seen Even if, because the thing is, even if it was a disaster, I don't really care because I never really cared for the film in the first place.
Yeah.
But I just would have loved to have seen their take on it because I feel like it just would have been like so unique and
Yeah.
so interesting.
I definitely feel like that would have worked better, especially like I have seen the Star Wars movies, and he's very much like he's obviously like that kind of like lovable rogue kind of character, and I feel like that would lend itself very well to their specific type of humor as well.
Exactly, and I just think I think that's is one of those things that like the new Star Wars movies have I guess you could say like a lot of the time they're kind of lacking in fun. Or I think the J.J. Abrams ones do like have like a fair bit of fun in them, but I do think that like it would have really pushed it. It would have been interesting. I mean, that's why like because Taika Waititi's announced to have like an upcoming Star Wars film. If it doesn't get cancelled, like every other Star Wars film that's been announced since like 2018, whenever Solo came out and didn't do very well. So I'd be very interested to see his take on a Star Wars movie because I feel like that's the closest we'll get to what like Lord and Miller's take was going to be. But yeah, it's just I feel like it's just such a shame because I think it would have been a better film. Or at the very least, it wouldn't have been a worse film than what we got.
No, that's a really interesting pick. I didn't know like that much about Solo as well, so yeah, no, that's interesting. I feel like that's actually made me quite sad because I feel like that would have been a better movie.
Yeah, exactly. I know all the Star Wars films we've had, and deprived of like one of the greats.
Yeah.
Oh well. There's a universe out there somewhere where they have it.
Exactly.
And I hate them for it. But anyway, with that, that is our 23rd BigLipz podcast concluded.
Crazy.
Which means we have one left basically, and I guess like series 1 of our podcast. So our series finale will be you, Catherine. You get to host the last one.
Pressure.
Which no pressure. But I'm very excited to see what you come up with for it. So until the next one, thank you very much, Catherine, as ever.
No worries, thank you.
To the rest of you out there, farewell.
See ya.